Today's watch you're about to see comes from Banggood. Thank you, Banggood, for sending this in. And apologies, because I didn't get around to showing this until way later in the video, which is why you guys are seeing it right now. And if you like this watch, the i4 Pro, check out the show notes. We have a link in there to take you right to this buying page and a discount coupon, if appropriate, that you can pick it up at a nice low price. Greetings! Welcome back to Smartwatch Ticks. We have an exciting and interesting unveiling for you today as we dive into yet another smartwatch. Well, okay, what have we got? Let's take a look. Inside all of this wrapping, inside all of these bags is a box that says Smartwatch on it. Okay. Yes. Oh, I just can't wait to get in. All right. Our surprise of the day in this really interesting presentation box is this one. Aha! Looks somewhat familiar? It should. We are looking at the next generation of the IQI watch, the i4 Pro. Now, something interesting as the market matures in smartwatches, we've seen the companies grapple with some of the different designs. For example, IQI came out with the i2 first, looked like this. Then they migrated to a much thinner watch with a kind of spaceship design, the i3, dressed it up a little bit, gave it some different facings, and then they matured to the i4. The i4, round, one button, simple design. And they stuck with the i4. Then they enhanced it with an increase in memory. The original i4, not the Plus. The original i4, well, it was 1 gigabyte and 8 gigabytes. And then they bumped up the i4 to 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabytes, and started calling it the i4 Plus. Then they bumped up the 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabytes to 2 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes. And here's where it gets confusing. Some places are calling that the i4 Pro. Other places are dropping the Plus and calling the i4 the 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte, because the 1 gigabyte, 8 gigabyte aren't here anymore. So you will see the i4 advertised as just the i4 with 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabytes. And the i4 Plus might be the 2 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte, because a new one is coming out that, well, we're hearing rumor may have a camera on it that will be called the i4 Pro. There! I hope that cleared everything up perfectly, right? For now, the 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte, when you shop for it, is called the i4. But I've referred to it as the i4 Plus because it went through a window in time where the bump up from the 8 gigabyte to 16 gigabyte caused it to be called Plus. You're also seeing this 2 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte when advertised as the Pro. That is in August 2017. It could be completely different later, and of course I have no idea for right now. But that's what I'm calling them here. That's why I've got them tagged. This is something I recorded after the review that you're about to see because I had to come back and clarify that. But I also want to show you a couple of things to expect as you watch. First of all, look at the bands. Notice something interesting? The buttons are on the side. But look, how did that happen? Well, you're going to learn that the bands are removable on these watches. And check this out. I'm going to set this one aside and bring this one in. A black one, because you see when I twist it, it shows you the digital time. That's on the i4 Plus. I'll explain in a minute why I'm showing it on the black one, which is the same i4 Plus as this one, 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte. And you get that, as we all know, on these kind of watches. But watch, on the i4 Pro, I get the watch face that I've selected, just like we've seen on a whole different variety of watches, the ones from number 1 and from Finow. They have that feature that when you twist them, it shows you the watch face and not the digital display. Yes, you're going to learn about that. And you're going to learn about why this one is bricked. Yes, it is bricked. Has nothing to do with changing the bands. In fact, I took the bands off to try to fix it. But you're going to learn something really important about firmware as it relates to the i4 line of watches and which ones you can flash with the new firmware and which ones you will brick if you try to flash that firmware to it. Let's keep moving. So, let's take a look at what they sent us. Oh, who sent us? Whoa! I can't leave out our wonderful sponsor, Banggood. I mean, these guys get stuff so soon. We've been working on this for about 2 months to get this here. They've shipped it out before it's even in stock. It's all in pre-order right now. And wow, they're just great. Anyway, we have a coupon down below in the show notes for you. Right now it's on the pre-order price. I don't know if I can beat that or not. It was at $99.99, but we didn't get it in time to get this on the video for you before that. But they're now in the phase of $109.99 before it pops up to $119. Still at $109.99 for a 2 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte smartwatch is awfully good price. And if I can get you a coupon to bring it down any, you'll see that in the show notes down below. And of course, using the links below to buy the watch will help support us, support Banggood, and make sure we keep getting these quality watches here for your review. Here's the specs on the i4 Pro. It's interesting the different companies are taking different approaches to how they name these upgrades. We've seen, where was it, Finow, with their really successful X5 line, went to the X5 Plus and now the X5 Air. Here, with the i4, we go to the i4 Plus and now to the i4 Pro. So a little bit of change, but nonetheless, I would call it the 3rd generation of the i4. Wow, it's a nice watch. Got a good feel to it. We got the one with the white band. And let's open that up. Wow. I think I'm pushing and pulling against myself here. What's up? There. Okay, it's a really solid band. And because it's white, you can see through the light where the antennas are. This is true of all of these. You see the antennas right there inside the band against the backlighting? That's why they're not removable. So you have to pick your band color when you get yours before you have it shipped to you, because that's what you're going to get, and that's what you're going to have. You cannot remove and change these bands. Let's take that little cover off. That's just the paper on here. Well, okay, it's got a cover over the plastic. And I'm telling you, I'm not a big fan of the plastic. There, you can see I've got one piece of plastic coming up, but there's another piece below. This is the protector for the screen protector, which, if you're lucky, is on here with no blemishes, no bubbles, nothing. But personally, I don't like it. It doesn't allow for smooth movement. It's sticky, and things seem to be slowing down when you try to scroll them, or sluggish. So I typically take this off. I'll try to work with it on. If I get frustrated, you'll see me peel it off. I don't think you need it. I've never, you know how many watches I've got, and I'm wearing them all the time, different ones, different places, banging them around. I have yet to have not one watch have a chip in the glass. So these plastic screen protectors for me are just an annoyance. We have one button, one microphone, and speakers on the side, charging port, screws to take off the back cover to get to the SIM. By golly, doesn't that look a whole lot like this one? In fact, if I didn't have the tag on there identifying the one that's the i4 Plus, Well, the bezel's slightly different. That's how you can tell the difference. Is there's a little thin white line going around here, possibly because when this one turns on, the bezel is so big where the watch is on the inside that, well, we'll see. We'll turn them both on and you kind of can compare. Okay, what else is in the box that they ship you? There's another box. Should be at least a charging cable. Yep, and that's your basic standard USB charger with the 4 connectors on the little adapter thing here on the end, or the little dongle on the end. There's something else in the box. Look, a screwdriver for taking off the screws to put your SIM card in. Almost missed that. Here's the manual in English. Really small, but hopefully you can read it on your screen. Talks a bit about some of the features. The layout for the sports, which is pretty interesting. And that's it. We got all the pages? Yeah. Okay. At this point, I'm going to not only charge this thing up, but I want to load it with the Antutu stuff so we can do the benchmark reporting and compare it with the baseline of the i4 Plus and see what difference that bump up in memory actually makes to these watches. Well, a lot can happen when the camera's off, and I was preparing to do this comparison between these two and walk you through the apps in the i4 Pro, and something caught my attention that had to do with the memory in this one. And I'm going to put in that segment right now because you're going to learn a lot, and some really good stuff and some really scary stuff. And I will be continuing after that little piece, all right, lengthy piece, and do that overall review that we're supposed to be doing. But instead, I'll be using this black i4 Plus. You're going to learn why right now. Again, this is the IQI iPro, and its difference from all the others is that it has 2 gigabytes of RAM, right? The Plus has 1 gigabyte. Well, when I was exploring this and getting ready to do these videos, I checked out, as we set this stuff up, the AIDA 64, like we've done before, and I go in here to the system and scroll down, and look what it says. It says the watch has 1 gigabyte of RAM, and 12.98 when you add the operating system, that adds up to 16. So it's got the 16 gigabytes of total storage, but it's only got 1 gigabyte of RAM, which makes it exactly the same watch as the Plus, if that's true. To confirm it, I worked with our technical experts over at the Pro Boards, and they said, well, double check it with the CPU-Z app, which is this one, and that's really, really tiny. Am I in the right place here? I think so. Device. Are you seeing the memory on here? Okay, 1 gigabyte. So confirmation, it's only reporting 1 gigabyte of RAM. All right, that was reported back to IQI, and they updated special firmware on here to be downloaded. So we're going to do that. But before I do that, I want to take you in to here and show you what we're running right now. It also says here, when we're in the About the Watch, it says it has 2 gigabytes of RAM and 16 gigabytes of phone storage. But that's not what we're getting when we run the actual analysis apps. So here's the kernel version, Monday, July 10th, 2017. I'm going to flash the new firmware that they sent us, and then we'll take another look. Okay, flashing is done. And asks us to confirm our language is English. Asks us for our weight, height, everything that you'd see when you start a brand new watch. I use Android. There's the code, but I don't need it right now. And it comes up in our first watch face. Let's check it out now. I come over here to settings. down to about. And our firmware, so again it says 2 and 16. And now our kernel version is Wednesday, July 12th, 2017. So we've got the new updated firmware. How about, these are all the stock apps. Okay, I'm going to have to get us on the internet and to download the software so that or the apps so that we can actually check what it reports is on board. Well, that took a while. All right, I'm all set up. We've downloaded our 2 test programs, AIDA 64. We go into System, we scroll down, and sure enough, now it's showing 2 gigabytes. In the former firmware, it showed 1 gigabyte. All right, so apparently, somehow, it was misreporting the memory on the watch because 2 days later, a new firmware release updated it to correctly show in the test programs 2 gigabytes. Now, the unfortunate thing is, this is a commercial watch that shipped to us from Banggood, just like you would order. And it came in erroneously showing 1 gigabytes in the firmware. And I'm not sure if the implication is only 1 gigabyte was available throughout the whole watch for you to use for all of your apps, or it was just an anomaly in reporting it. Nonetheless, it seems to be working now. Let's check out the CPU-Z. Here we go, loading up. And we switch over to this pane, slide down a little bit. There you go, total RAM, 1985, which is 2 gigabytes. The available RAM, internal storage is 13, which is after you subtract out the operating system, of course. So here it's showing the 2 gigabytes, really accurately in the CPU-Z report. So both of them are confirming now that the watch actually does have 2 gigabytes of RAM after we did the firmware update. So what would happen if we try to flash this new firmware that's designed for the 2 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte i4 Pro to the 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte i4 Plus? Well, let's try it and find out. First of all, let's go into the AIDA 64 and confirm that we've got what it says, 1 gigabyte on here, and 12 something or other, which when you add the operating system adds up to about 16, right? So it's a 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte as reported on the firmware. Now, in the settings, about watch, you can see that the current kernel version, which is what we monitor, is Wednesday, March 22nd, 2017. Let's do that firmware update now. Okay, we're flashed. Now we press and hold. And nothing's happening. All right, folks, this is why you don't want to do this at home. Let the fools do it, like me. I've only got one button. That's not a reset port, by the way. That's your microphone. Don't go sticking anything in there. Not working at all. But that's all right, I hope, because I've got the old firmware that I can flash back onto this watch. But apparently then the 2 watches are distinctly different in the firmware that they use because you cannot flash the 2 gigabyte based firmware onto a 1 gigabyte watch. All right, let's go back and flash it with the earlier software or firmware. Well, I have a lot of news for you now. First of all, when it comes to the flashing, that's what we were trying to do, remember? This wouldn't work when I wouldn't turn on. When I flashed, it's the i4 Plus, the 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte, yeah, you're with me. Tried to put in the firmware from the 2 gigabyte one and it wouldn't turn on. So I went back to reflash back to the earlier firmware that was supported of the i4 Plus 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte version, and it wouldn't work there either. I got the same errors. Just isn't happening. So I checked with the technical experts again, and they said that it might be an issue with the preloader and that I needed to disconnect the battery in order to free up the preloader and then try flashing again. So I took the back off, and as I brought the watch down to get ready to do this little video to show you where you can take off the battery, which is right there next to the connectors, because you may end up having to do this too if you inadvertently flash the wrong firmware, right? Well, when I brought it down here, doggone if the bands didn't just pop right out. And it turns out, it looks like that way back when, the old i4 Plus and probably the new one have quasi-removable bands. As long as you get the band, I guess, that's configured for this, they got a little slot now that the antennas slide into on both of them. And they just have a little plastic connector that goes down where the holes are. This slides right in there. There's one antenna in this one. You can see there's only one wire going through it, right? And there's two over here, and they're removable bands. So we learned the good news is that you really can actually replace the bands on the i4 Plus. We're calling it the Plus, the 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte i4 watch. Bad news is, so far, I have not been able to restore this watch by flashing it in the normal way. I'm not doing anything exotic, just using the download only button and the procedures we've done before. Didn't let it happen, so I'm stuck. Now I've disconnected the battery. I'm going to reconnect it, put the watch back together again, and go back and attempt to flash the original firmware that this one had before I got into this mess. We'll see what happens. Well, really bad news, folks. Really bad news. Wow. I don't even know how we're going to reconcile this in the future, because a lot of you guys are probably going to go down this path and end up the same way I have with a bricked watch. I didn't know it was possible. There, you see how easy it is to take that out? And that one's falling out too. This is the original i4 Plus, and it's bricked. I cannot flash the old firmware back to it, even after disconnecting the power right here and waiting, reconnecting it, and going back to flash it again. I get the same basic error, and it's telling me that the preloader or something is corrupt or is not working. And I've gone back 3 levels of old firmware, the ones that are maintained on the Pro boards, designed for the 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte size and style i4 watch, and nothing happens. It won't work. So, lesson learned here. There are 2 different, well, actually there's 3. There's 3 different watches out there for the i4. There's the old original 1 gigabyte, 8 gigabyte version. There's the 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte that you're looking at right here. And there's the new 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte. Yeah, we can't do anything because it's attached to the screen way down in there. I thought I could take it out and show it to you. Probably can, but I'm not quite sure. I might have to disconnect more. Anyway, firmware-wise, it's going to feel really logical to update to the latest firmware, won't it? I mean, everybody does. And in case of the i4, if you update any of your earlier i4s to the newest version, I'll show them on the screen at the very end, watch out, because it won't run, and it appears you won't be able to go back. It will not load, and it will not turn on. The watch is basically bricked. Not a good sign, but we did discover through all of this that the bands are removable. They really are. And you could probably order yourself a couple of different sets of bands. The white ones I like in particular. They're pretty cool. Get the screw stuck in that hole. But they all have these little slots that you can slide right over the antennas and change the band out. So when I've always been saying, no, an Android watch, you cannot change the bands, with the exception of the JM01, which snaps out, I take that back. On the IQI i4, and I'm not sure how far back we go, to the original or to the Plus or to the new Pro, but definitely easy to pop the bands off. Bad news is we've got this firmware issue that the newest version shipped with firmware that indicated it had 1 gigabyte of RAM instead of 2. And that's the only difference between the new one, supposedly called the Pro, and the older one, supposedly called the Plus, was that extra gigabyte of RAM. Everything else is identical. So without that extra one showing up or usable, you basically got a bigger RAM watch that uses more power, that costs you more money, but it wasn't accessible unless you update the firmware. But for goodness sakes, don't update that same firmware to the old ones, okay? Well, isn't that the cat's meow, huh? Okay, we're going to actually do a review. I haven't even started yet. All that was preliminary stuff. Doggone it. So let's review. I showed you this earlier. I want to show it to you again right now. This is one of the exciting features of the update to the i4 Pro. In the original i4 Plus and all the earlier ones, including the Kingwear watches and a bunch of the others, in fact, everything except FiNow and #1 watches, when you have that turn wrist to look at the time thing activated, you get a digital display. Doesn't matter what your watch face is. The only way to get to the watch face is touch it while it's on the digital and it fades into your selected watch face. Not so with the new i4 Pro. When you twist it, you get the watch face you've selected. And that's cool. So finally, we are back where a lot of people have complained about. They didn't like the digital one. My goodness, you got all these different custom ones. And now you can have it. And of course, if you touch it before it goes out, you've locked it into your screen timeout, however long that is, and you can press and hold and change watch faces if you want to. Speaking of which, we are doing a review of this watch, so I'm going to run through the watch faces first. On this one, without going into every one of them, except these beginning ones I want to show you are the animated ones. You see the bubbles moving behind the time very slowly. These are your live wallpaper type watch faces that are going to really eat up your battery, so they say. And on a 2 gigabyte watch, that's not a cool thing, because that might also be eating up your power. But we still need to hear from folks about what their battery life is, so when you get your Pro, please check it out for us and report back on whether you're getting decent battery life. Amazing watch, awesome potential. The only possible really bad drawback would be battery life. And that could be huge because the battery is still the same size as it is in all the other i4s. Nonetheless, we got some pretty cool watch faces in here. And these first selection, like I say, are the live wallpaper ones. That one's taking a while to load. I kind of remember this one was funky before. We've seen that on the earlier i4s, and if it doesn't lock in, it just stays kind of fuzzy like that. But it's supposed to do an animation. Then you get to the static ones. That's the stock one that you see often on this. And these other ones, like these. The globe. Then you start getting to some fun new ones. We showed that one the beginning of this segment, or the earlier segment. Here's another one. Then you got the quintessential round one we see on all of them. I like that because you get your battery display. And another one here. And more that you've seen. Now, these are new. You see the i4 on here? These are some new watch faces that have been designed specifically for the i4 line that are appearing on this watch. Now, we talked about the firmware. If indeed there are firmware updates for the earlier i4s prior to the 2 gigabyte version, then you can successfully flash those firmwares to the 1 gigabyte watches, and that should be fine. And most likely, if they do an update, and I'm really hoping they do because of two things. One, I'd like to see these watch faces added back and onto the standard i4 watch. And secondly, the twist to see the screen that lights up this display should be incorporated on those as well. I can't see where that would be a feature that is unique to having a 2 GB watch. I could see it being withheld as a marketing tactic and have it only on the 2 GB version, so that those of you who really want that twist arm to see the actual display would be forced to buy it. But that's not the kind of tactics we see coming in from our friends across the pond over there. So I think we're going to see firmware updates to the original i4 line soon. Well, there's a fun one. I didn't notice that. I like that. Should try that one in a mirror. Wow. Okay, i4. Awesome stuff. Yeah. There's a lot of new ones. Yes, there are. I know some of you get bored with this, but we're going to keep going. Okay, now we're into more of Alrod's custom faces. Yes, indeed. I wanted to put these in to see if they would load. And oh boy, do they. There are a whole bunch of them. Now, you're noticing there's duplicates of all of his that are showing up. That's because the code he had to write to be able to work on the Kingware KW88 class of watches and work on the FiNow #1 type of watches required two separate but similar files that load up the thumbnails. And now they've all shaken hands and made nice and agreed that they'll load up both of those on both kinds of watches. And so now you could use either one, but because he put all these out, and a lot of other developers have done this too, because they've put a whole bunch of these out with both kinds in there, you're getting one thumbnail from one of those and one from the other. So you're getting a bunch of duplicates until that's all been corrected. And that's something, I don't know. That's just funky the way this is all unfolded. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on watch faces. We could do another whole thing on these, but just to give you an idea of what some of these look like on the i4 Plus, Pro, whatever it's going to be called, and what it looks like on. Okay, let's talk about the apps now. I mentioned in that little segment where I was really upset about the only thing that the difference is between these two is a bump up in the memory. This is 2 GB and this is 1. Well, obviously you're seeing that's not all. The twist to turn to show the watch faces is different between the two. And you're going to find that the layout, when you get into the apps, is also somewhat, well, maybe they're not different. Okay, they're not different. At least not in this layout. The scrolling is quick and sharp on both of them. So we have plenty of RAM and everything to work with either one of these. And now when we run the AIDA 64, and look at the configurations, you see that everything is fine as far as memory goes. We've got 1 GB here, and here we should have 2 GB. Get that in focus? 1 and 2. So after the firmware flash, it's correct on here. This firmware, which I didn't mess with, is correct, and everything's reporting back nicely. So what's the big difference? What's the big deal about having the... Wow, it's not on here. I'm going to load that up. About having the extra memory. I don't know. The only thing I could say is we run the Antutu test and see if all of the benchmark testing it does results in larger RAM. There. We've got Antutu ready to go on both of them. It has not been run, so this is going to be a first time run. I'm going to bring them both up, and we're going to compare. Interesting. It shows up a little bit different. Oh, that's because this one's in the square. Let's bring that one back to the full screen. Okay, everything as close as possible, and test. Oh, don't tell me I didn't hit you. Doggone it. All right, that one's slightly behind. Sorry, I can't shut it off once it starts. Try your best to hit those things exactly. Anyway, so it's going to do the graphics display on both of them. Looking for any lag time, smoothness. The bottom one is the 1 GB, the top one is the 2. Look at those fade outs and fade ins. I guess it's good they're slightly different. You can look at one and then look at the other. Now this is sequenced to run at a specific speed with the music and everything, so that should have been the exact same time for both of them. And now the rest of it, if there's any difference in speed in doing the testing, it's going to happen right now. And it's going to take a while. So I'm going to leave these right here. I'm going to put the camera in pause. Once it switches over, there. Okay, they're both at 50%. We'll be back when it gets close to 90 plus. Okay, I've been watching them as it's been going, and there's a 2-second delay between the first one, the one on the right, and the one on the left, and it hasn't changed. As you can see, right now. Oh, maybe it was right there. I just touched it and it came up. Okay, I guess it was ready. Wow, really, really close, slightly higher on the 2 GB one, 21058, 20,469. Really, really close though, and over the entire test, it would be microseconds in terms of any difference that this one may have run faster than that one to complete the test. But again, it's not just about the time, it was about testing all sorts of different facets of how these things work, for those of you who know all about the Antutu report. All right, so I would claim that there's no significant difference in overall speed, and when you look at the installed apps between the two, these are the stock apps showing up here, and we've run through these a million times, so I'm really not going to belabor it since this is such a long review anyway. The Play Store, the Maps, Chrome, and the Play Store are reversed. That's the only thing I see there, but they're both here. And now we get into display brightness, which is one that I've added on here that isn't on that one, so that's a custom one. But the reminder, the remote, music, find your device, switching between iOS and Android, and that's it. All the rest of these are different custom ones that I've installed to test it out. So bottom line, folks, I don't know what to tell you. By way of summary, I would first of all be really careful in terms of doing any firmware flashing. If you're not familiar with it, don't do it. There should be an over-the-air update to the new i4 Pro if you get one that has the firmware that when you run one of these, either CPU-Z or AIDA64, if it reports back 1 GB of RAM, then it's either not reporting it right or it's only seeing 1 GB, which means it's only using 1 GB for any of the apps you run on it, in which case it's exactly the same watch as this, except whatever power is used on that extra missing 1 GB may still be being used, and so you may have less battery power than on this one. But if you get that straightened out by flashing this one with the correct firmware to update it, and let's go in there again so you can see what you need to flash to, or your over-the-air update would bring you up to at least the kernel version, July 12th, 2017. Your version should be at least that date. And it should be okay. Other than that, the real big difference is the twist to show the display time has been updated so that you get this display instead of that one. There's been an update to the watch face process at the very end when you scroll through all of your installed faces. There was a problem in the past where you could actually brick the watch. Well, not really brick it, but just it would be a problem that you wouldn't see the watch faces, and you might have to do flashing possibly. Anyway, that's been fixed, and it's been fixed with the update to the firmware to the older one as well. So it's got this little round thing here. You touch that, and it cleans up everything related to your watch faces and brings you back to the very first one. And that way, if there's any corruption in there, it's all taken care of. But that's in both of them. So the only main difference that I'm seeing in here is the 2 gigabytes of RAM and the twist to show the display. In terms of battery power, that would be the other thing to know. And I don't have a way of testing all of that out on so many watches, so I rely on our viewers to give us that information. The likelihood, if it's the same battery, if there's more memory, is that this one's going to run out faster than that one. But there could be something in the firmware update that gives it a little better power management. But if true, then that would probably be sent over to this one as well. And so you'd still maybe have a disadvantage in having the more memory if you're not going to be using it. For now, both of these versions are on the market. Check what the names are. You're going to find the 1 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte is called the i4, not the i4 Plus. You're going to find the 2 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte is called the i4 Pro in the few places that do carry it. Primarily, this one, Banggood. Banggood are the folks that sent this wonderful watch out for us to evaluate, and we wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for them. So if you are inclined to pick up the i4 Pro, do it here. And the link's down below in the show notes. If you can, use that link. Check out the price. We're going to try to keep a coupon going for you to get a good discount price. And picking it up from Banggood definitely gives us support, gives them support, and ultimately gives you support. So we'll get some of this fresh, first, and important watch technology to review as new ones come out on the market. One last time. Word of warning, there's going to be different firmwares coming out. It used to be you didn't have to worry as long as the CPU, the chip, was the same across these watches. You could flash the firmware as willy-nilly. You could update them all. But as we've seen with this one earlier, the bricked i4 Plus, you cannot take the firmware that is designed to run on the i4 Pro, the 2 gigabyte watch. You cannot flash that to the 1 gigabyte watch. You try it, it may work, but you can't turn it on. And after that, when you try it again, or even go back, from my experience, it doesn't work at all. There may be some tweaking you can do by checking or unchecking preloaders. It's way beyond me. If you know how to do that stuff, and you can do it successfully, then by all means do. But the only advantage I can see you may be getting is that twist to turn to bring up the full display instead of the digital display. And if it's that important to you to risk bricking your watch, well, good luck. Otherwise, I would wait for a firmware update on the traditional i4 and see if that update gives you that capability in the future. You've been watching a long, long one. For those of you sticking on this long, wow. You got more stamina than I do because I got to take breaks. Please subscribe if you haven't. We really appreciate that. Thumbs up if you like it, especially this one because it's an important one to understand about what's happening now with these firmware issues. And we'll be back again, definitely.